Fortbase is part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Welcome back to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. Today we have Tim Schnurr joining me, Matt Fish from Fort Mesa. Tim's actually an old friend of the Fort Mesa network here. He helped us launch into the service provider channel. So welcome back, Tim. It's been a little while.
Yeah,
I think
great to be back.
If you scroll way back in our video archive or our audio archive, you will see Tim in like episode 1. So Tim, you've had a little bit of journey since you went off on adventures here, and right now you've arrived at this place where you are really focused really on data security and defending intellectual property, and we're going to dig more into that later. But essentially, you're our IP defense or intellectual property defense expert, as far as we have one in our service partner network. How did you arrive there? I guess like normally this story starts with at the beginning of the career when I ask someone, and then the end of the career is you're on stage with us today as a security expert. But I guess Fort Mesa was a stop on the road for you. So maybe give us a little idea of what led to this data security practice you've been developing.
Yeah. First, thanks for having me back on. So a little bit of my background, 15 years ago, I was part of a intellectual property brokerage, which we had a lot of fun. We used to sell patents, royalties, domains, anything intellectual property wise at auction, right? So like live open outcry auctions. They were a lot of fun. They were in really nice places.
Wait, this is when 15 years ago?
15 years ago.
Yeah. And that was like a sexy time for the patent and IP world, right?
It was. Yeah. The patent market was extremely strong. If anyone ever remembers like the Nortel portfolio, Nortel,
I remember.
Huge, another Canadian company that kind of went downhill. BlackBerry portfolio, also Nokia portfolio, right? So like many of these early mobile phone patents, a lot of these early e-commerce patents.
Motorola had a big portfolio that was around that time as well, right?
Yeah, and if you remember that Google actually bought Motorola, took the IP portfolio, stripped it out, and resold Motorola.
Yeah, they really did well off that one, I think.
Yeah, they kept the IP. So it really got adventurous in the IP world. There was a company called Intellectual Ventures, which was a former CTO of Microsoft, CTO, I believe, started call it a hedge fund for patents. So the patent world got, very excited. But after that, kind of that patents last 20 years, right? So you think about like beginning of the e-commerce world, 1990s, a lot of those things got sold. A lot of people got sued, probably that maybe shouldn't have gotten sued. There was a word called patent troll. So the patent market, put it this way, kind of hit its peak, I guess, 2010, 2011, prices started to decline. Patent world. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of patents, but
we're going to come back, I think.
Okay, great.
But where does your story intersect there? So you were swinging for vines?
The COO of that company. It was about a 20-person shop. It was rolled out of another big financial brokerage. So like I said, a lot of fun. as the patent kind of market fell apart, we started to do a lot more patent valuation, patent advisory, IP advisory. Ended up in Deloitte for 5 years, and that's where it started to cross over, I think, with a lot of things we'll talk about today. Insider threat, trade secrets, crown jewel defense, things like that. So I got highly involved in that, and got really learned a lot in cybersecurity as I got exposed to the SOC. Deloitte has a big MSSP, which is defending, call it like top 50 of the biggest customers in the world, doing incident response. So learned a lot, really thrown into the fire. So it was great to kind of get that exposure on the right of boom side and also the left of boom side as well, in terms of, IP, IP defense, IP posture. What can you do to, help those things? So, and then the rest is history, right? Matt and I joined in 2021. Fort Mesa launched into the channel. Pitch It competition, 2021, 2022. I think it was 21. Maybe it might have been 22, 23, I think. Sean Lardo and folks. But yeah, so, got involved with Matt and I really trying to push Fort Mesa into the channel and MSP world. So
It turned out you like the MSP world.
Well, I learned a lot about serving small businesses, right? Like, I was very focused on financial services, banks, federal agencies, right? Like, how do they do things? And what are some of those lessons we can teach small businesses and the IT outsourcers that serve them? So,
all right. Well, we'll get more into the IP stuff, but today I wanted to take today's Trade Secrets Day and what's trade secret, how to defend them, which is has a dot into cyber. So we're gonna get into that in a little while. But before we do that, I want to do a quick intellectual property primer, because I think many MSPs out there, when they see the words IP, they think Internet Protocol or IP address. But
right.
there's something that needs to be understood here, because your customers definitely care. They don't care about Internet Protocol, but they definitely care about intellectual property. And you you need to become as an MSP, you need to become at least as versed as your clients are in this. So with that,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, we have a little segment intro there. So it's like super quick, not even a 101, just a 90.
Yeah.
So when we say intellectual property, there's lots of detail here, but what we're basically talking about is one of four things. And today's Trade Secret Day, but intellectual property could also be it could be copywritten materials, which are not necessarily secret. Usually, it's not secret. Could be a trademark. Um, it could be a patent. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then it could be trade secrets. And trade secrets have become a whole lot more important over the last 15 years, because patents become a difficult space um, in innovation these days. So I'm just going to do a real quick. What do we mean? What do we mean by each of these things? So a copyright, usually what we're talking about is something that is collateralized. So it's a book, it's a piece of music, it's a film, it's a piece of software. It's not necessarily something you can touch, but it is usually a specific item that can be taken away. Um, I just want to talk over some basics here. And there's one big misconception that I've seen in my career is people oftentimes think that you have to mark things copyrighted or that you have to register them, but copyright automatically applies upon creation. And everything you create as a person, as an entity, is automatically subject to copyright law, unless you do something that would exempt you from copyright law, or that would make you waive one of your rights. So there are some things you need to do to protect your copyrights, but they are automatic, at least in the U.S. Um, and when you copyright something for basically your entire life, the natural life of a person, and Disney's done a good job of extending that to be much longer. What is it? The Mickey Mouse protections, what is it, 115 years now or something like that?
Right.
Um, in any case, when you copyright something, it's as long as you protect your copyright, it's basically um, uh, it's from a subjective perspective forever protected, right? Um, Couple notes. People who want to use things, they want to reuse things that might be out there in the world. They have an obligation to reasonably seek a license from you. However, if you don't do a good job of being easy to find, and they can't figure out who owns something, then you lose the ability to defend that. Um, you as the creator, you can actually deny license. So you don't have to let someone use your stuff. Um, but if you don't defend it, right? If you don't say who can use something and who can't use something, if you're not easy to contact, if you don't mark your materials created by, essentially it becomes an undefended copyright, and oftentimes that means that the copywritten material falls into the public domain. And there are exceptions to copyright law. There's things you can't copyright, but that's the basics of it. Trademark. I'm going to move on here. Trademark protects either a name or a symbol or a design. Um, and these are things that are used to mark you in commerce. So think of the name of a product like Coca-Cola, TM, right? Or any number of other brand names you may see out there, or stamps you may see on things, logos you may see on things. Um, when you and this is something you have to do, you have to register a trademark. It's not automatic, but when you register a trademark, you get the ability, if that trademark is approved, to enforce that for your category of trade. And you do need to register a trademark for each category of trade. So if you're someone like Google and you register your trademark for business information services, which is probably where they fall automatically, but you don't bother to register it for apparel, and that does mean that someone gets to go print a T-shirt with your with your brand name on it. Unfortunately, if you haven't also registered it there. Um, and they mostly protect you from someone like a competitor trying to horn in, right, and pretend to be you. But again, if someone's using your trade name and you don't defend yourself, you don't enforce it, you do lose access to that protection. In addition to that, if your trademark falls into public use, when we say something like Google it, right? I want to go Google something, that word has essentially become common use. And Google's got a lot of lawyers out there, and this has not been tested in court. And I don't think Google wants to test it in court. But if it was tested in court, I think that they would probably lose the right to enforce that trademark, because um, everyone says Google it, right? So you don't want your name to fall into public common use. And the way to prevent that is to enforce that trademark. Uh,
I think you do want it to become common use, but you just don't want
Yeah,
it.
I mean there's a balance
It's a
point
good
there,
problem to
right?
have. Yeah, yeah,
No one's gonna confuse like who's Google, but if they don't have that trade name, right? Someone else could just like say
right.
put Google it on their product, right? Um, Patents. I don't know a lot about patents because when I started my companies in software, I was told, you know what, it's not such a good time to do software patents, and maybe in a few years they will come back. This is what I was told several years ago, but that hasn't happened yet. It's really difficult patent space right now. But real quick, patents protect inventions, technological advancements. They grant exclusive rights to make or sell an invention, but it's time limited. Um, in addition to that, there are circumstances where you can be compelled to license your patent to other people. There are certain situations where even if you have a patent, you are forced to license that to someone else on fair, reasonable licensing. Um, they're increasingly difficult to obtain, particularly in software. Although, if you're creating a drug, you can patent your drug, right? But even if you patent your drug, there are ways where you can lose the ability to enforce that patent. As an example I'm aware of, if you make a life-saving drug and your factory can't spit enough of that out, the government has put an exemption in there that says, hey, guess what? Someone else is allowed to make your drug. So without license. So, it's patents used to be great protection for individual inventors, but it's become a difficult space to use patents. But um, you can still use them to defend yourself against others, and that's one of the most popular ways to use patents. And Tim, I'm going to count on you to fill us in on what that means, because
Yeah.
I understand patents aren't just used to protect people in commerce, right? You can use them a number of different ways, right?
So I think the important thing is, like, without diving too deep here, is same thing with copy. Some of the previous slides we had here. Small business owners, you're serving them. You're a small business as an MSP. What do I have to do starting a new MSP to navigate the IP world? The most important thing is not trampling on someone else's IP rights, especially if they are well funded, giant. Local Ken made a great comment here in the comments, right? Same thing about having all the money to enforce it. So patents are a game of kings. You need to have millions and millions of dollars to collect a portfolio, a global portfolio, filing not only in the United States but also in other strong jurisdictions around the world. It takes a very long time. Cases take years, and before anyone patents, certainly come and talk to me, because that was our business. We used to talk to thousands of patent holders or owners a year, and figure out kind of like what would be sellable, what wouldn't be sellable. And I think most patent people in the patent world will agree 99% of patents are worthless, if not more, just because the claims are weak, right? And so it's gotten very tough to enforce patents in the United States. It's even harder to enforce them against strong hands and wealthy, well-funded hands.
I haven't been following this super closely, but there's the heart rate sensor in the Apple Watch was an interesting case, because
It was.
This was a legitimate patent claim. Maybe. I mean, I don't want to be too. I don't want to. I don't want to take sides, but basically the claim was upheld. Right. It took
Right.
many years to be upheld.
Yeah, and so that's like an outlier case where they actually did win, right? Like, as you said, they won.
They
2011.
won, but it took forever, right?
Right. 2011, Obama prints the American Invents Act, which is basically, when you have a patent, it can go back to the patent office for review for eligibility. So they take a second look at it. Well, guess what? When it goes back to the patent office, most of the time, the majority of the time, the lion's share of the time, they're invalidated. So, as you said, Matt, it was looked at again. It was validated. I believe they sued, actually not in federal court, but actually the ITC, International Trade Commission.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another court that's doesn't do in-depth trials, but it just figures out if there's infringement, and if there's infringement, you can stop the importation of Apple Watches with that. Right.
And I'm not even sure if there was ever a settlement, because I know that Apple pulled that feature off of the shelf for import. But
yeah, in the meantime, right? Like, they didn't want to. They had to comply to the order, but they're still appealing it. Unfortunately, anytime you hear about $1 billion verdicts in appeal,
but we're like 14 years in at this point. Is that like what you're saying?
They'll probably win, right? Like, they'll either the last thing they want to do is actually sit down and do a license with this owner, but like, they may get there at some point. They will,
Yeah.
They will.
Not a tool that most small businesses need to worry about, but
you need to worry about other people's patents. You need to
worry about other people's patents,
other people's domains, right? Like, that's the biggest thing. Find your domain, do a search, make sure there isn't similar domains. That's kind of a startup, a risk early on, is like, you'll trample on someone's domain, and someone else's IP, and you won't have, call it, freedom to operate, right? So
yeah, and so this used to be the space where you protected your software inventions, or with copyright, but increasingly, and this is the interesting category, increasingly you use trade secrets. As an example, Fort Mesa, my company, your old alma mater here, Tim, we use trade secrets to defend our software because there's pieces of our software that are free for our customers to use. But then there's pieces of our software that the easiest way to defend that is not with a patent, but it's simply to sock some of our source code away on servers that don't go out to clients, right? And we have copyright on our code, but essentially the way we're able to operate a software business is by saying that, well, the subscription's enforceable because a piece of the software lives in our systems. And if someone was able to extract that out, right, they would then be able to run our software without us. And if we didn't protect it, we might actually lose the ability to enforce that trade secret. That's maybe not the best example. I can
I
think
think
of
you
a
did a
few
great job,
others.
Matt. So, I came in, met Matt. A couple other things we'll talk about in the show here is employee contracts. Like, in order to protect a trade secret, you need to make reasonable protections. And this is a frank conversation, right,
We
Matt?
did a whole episode on reasonable, which was I had a lawyer
Right,
on, I had
right.
an
So,
attorney on, and he was just laughing. He's like, "Well, I could defend anything as being reasonable."
yeah, well, put it this way: you're in court. That's a different, arguing reasonable and making reasonable precautions to protect your trade secrets, right? And there's other things outside of software, right? Like Matt, Ford Mesa does a great job with marketing and the way you run your podcast, or little things like onboarding procedures, right? Like all of these things are proprietary, right? Like you've had failings, like you've tried things and they didn't work, right? That's actually a trade secret. Your things that didn't work. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and when I exited the company, I was, pretty aware of not only my obligation and acknowledgement of the IP, which I signed when I, you know, became a part of Fort Mesa, but also all the things that Matt had put into place, such as zero trust, right? Access, being very careful about access and need to know access, and even some of the features in your stack, right, that track logging, like when did you access a file, when did you not access a file. These things would be deterrents. I'm certainly aware of them because I'm an IP, but employees should be like, oh, maybe I can't take that with me. Right. So those are all the reasonable protections that Matt put in place so that I didn't go start another Fort Mesa.
Well, and so I'm a cyber guy, right? And I run a cyber company. And if I didn't use those tools that we have in place to protect specific data, specific trade secrets, right? Someone could look at that data, those trade secrets, and say, well, you didn't even use the protections that you know about to protect those things. So how secret could they be? And
Right.
you'd lose the ability to enforce that. But in any case, one of the really great things about a trade secret is if you do all the right things, and that data is misused, right? The
Misappropriated, we'll call it.
misappropriated, right? And it can be proven. And it's not that hard to prove if you've done all the things you should be doing. Um, the claim can be unlimited, right?
It really
So
can. And the scope of things that you can put in that bucket is pretty much unlimited. It doesn't cost any money.
yeah, you
There,
don't have to register trade secrets. In fact, if you do register trade secrets, they're no longer secrets. So
that's right. And not a lot of legal dollars, right? Like maybe in your contractual agreements, your employee agreements. You probably had Brad on before, but there's some great people that can help with that as well. But very little legal dollars. These things, as we'll talk about them, align very well and overlap with many of the things, best practices for cybersecurity. So,
we went through all of that because I wanted to stop here and say, okay, well, trade secrets are supposed to reasonably defend them, but like, what does that mean? Does that mean like I install the EDR and set and forget? I have the VSOC, I bought Huntress, like set and forget, like I'm protecting the trade secrets. I would argue in most cases that's not going to cut it.
no.
I think in its most basic form, at the very least, you at least need to like decide what is Like as an organization at the senior level, right? You need to designate, okay, what's the sensitive stuff? What are the secrets? Like, and yes, you can extend that blanket from a claim perspective, but if you don't even have a list of what your data is that's important, not the contents of the data, right? You could say, like, for us, right? We've got customer lists, we've got source code. Yes, we've got procedures that we use to operationalize our services and marketing, right? Our partner success. All of these things are basically the crown jewels, and I love that word that you used. And I think that as a service provider, if we brought on an MSP to defend our IP, and we haven't gone through that list with them, and they haven't assured us that they provided protections for each of those things, right? I don't think that they're really doing the job of protecting those trade secrets. So, eh, what what have you seen for? I mean, a lot of organizations theoretically understand they have stuff that's confidential, but do you think people are taking this more seriously now than they were a few years ago?
Yeah, so I wrote a quick post this morning, and we'll start to use this word insider, right? Insider threat, external threat, right? So trade secrets, insider threat. A lot of times they talk about negligent insider threat, like someone clicks a phishing link. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about malicious insider threat, where you're intentionally, the intent matters, taking things with you, as we said, misappropriating, um, proprietary data.
What
So
about those company laptops that like never like
yeah,
since COVID they've been hard to get back when people leave, right?
right,
Um,
right. So yeah, so all these things we're talking about, it's great if you do all of them. You still have a chance in court if you don't do them. Like clearly, if you're violating your employment agreement, it, it it's going to hurt. But Matt just mentioned cataloging, listing things of value that helps as well, because clearly you're saying these are offside, don't take them with you. But it can be beyond that, right? So there's overlapping employee law, there's overlapping federal law, the Defend Trade Secrets Act. So there's different jurisdictions here. There's a lot more balls in play here. There's a lot more areas that you can actually enforce these rights, as opposed to just, we were just talking about patents, right? Only in the federal jurisdiction.
well, and you're in our service partner network right now.
Right.
And this morning we were on a call and we were talking about go to market strategy, right?
That's right.
And it was a water cooler conversation essentially, right? But actually, for both of us, right? We were both talking about valuable stuff, right? This is stuff that, if I were to repeat right here, would no longer be a trade secret, right?
That's right.
Um, and that's also on that list.
It
So,
would be,
and it could
it's that
be,
wide. Yeah. It's
it
that
could
wide. The scope
be,
is that wide. Yeah.
it could be in your Microsoft Teams like AI like synopsis of your meeting, right? And if you're not careful, if you're not careful, right? I have, my calendar's full all day, right? I'm having meetings all day with all different companies, and all day, like these note takers are showing up, and I have to make a decision every single time I have a meeting because I need to worry about this, right? Do I trust that person's note taker, right? And unfortunately, frequently, the answer is I deny access to the note takers because I know that I want to talk about some things that are confidential. I know that I want to talk about things that are confidential for us, confidential for the client. And if they go out to the note taker, right, they may no longer be considered trade secrets. And so I have that worry, right? But there's lots of sort of equivalent examples these days, right?
AI is a slippery slope, right? I mean, you don't using those note takers, like, where's the data live, right? Data residence, data, in transit and
Yeah, are they paying
address,
for the thing? Did they
right? So
sign away their rights? Did they
it
sign away
varies.
my rights?
Yeah. And we didn't even talk about, like, data classification, right? That's a tool that can help you make a list, classify things that are inbounds and out of bounds. Same thing with those AI note taking, like, as it's they are they're creating more data, and is it classified? Probably not. So yeah, no, it's as you just
I,
had like that conversation between me and you. If I was still formally an employee of Ford Mesa, like, am I, I went out and created another company that's worth $2 billion, Matt would be pretty upset. Did I violate my,
well, I'd also be cheering you on.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, things end well. Certain employees leave and it doesn't end well. And that this conversation, I think, really resonates with small business owners, right? Like, you start talking about,
Oh, they need to worry about that every single day
right.
because most small business owners are competing with other small businesses, right? And they do worry about Jane leaving the front office going across the street, right?
It
Or they
happens
should
all the
be.
time. Small businesses, right? You hear about cooks, chefs, right? Like, if they put them under the same stringent bank contractual agreements, they'd have a harder time leaving and creating the same restaurant. So, yeah.
So, I mean, it's all the same tools that you use to protect the confidentiality of anything else that's not a trade secret, right? From a mechanical perspective, you inventory stuff, you classify stuff like secret, confidential, restricted, public, like whatever as your company, however you decide you want to label things. Um, and then you need to secure the infrastructure that data flows through. But with trade secrets, so with non-trade secrets, confidential data, right? Um, the data leaks out. The data doesn't leak out. Like the real question mark is, okay, does this lead to regulatory action, or does this lead to contract violation, or does this lead to like some kind of other loss? Like you get to sort of roll the dice there, and just if you think that the risk is low, you can defend it at low. If you think the risk is high, you can defend it at high. But with trade secrets, the calculus is a little different because if you decide to accept the risk that your secrets will leave, right, and then they leave, you may actually lose rights to them. Like,
If you don't have the reasonable protections in place, you're going to lose the rights for them regardless. It's baffling how big a risk and how big the global losses are in terms of insider risk versus external. I always say insiders know exactly where the valuable stuff is. They know, they have access to it. They know who to sell it to, or how to monetize it, right? So it happens all the time. Proprietary data, trade secrets, largely unregulated, right? There's no the SEC. I mean, maybe the SEC if there's public investors involved. Most of the time, there's no one coming after you. It's not like privacy data, right? So I talked about today. There was a TD Bank leak someone had unauthorized access to confidential personal PII. They got access to it. They took it. Now there's a class action lawsuit, right?
mhm.
So same protections should be in place, right? Like, how did they access it? Was it need to know basis? How are they unauthorized, which I thought was interesting? And then how do they actually get it off premise, either physically or digitally, right? So you've had some great guests on here, right, Matt? So Sention, configuration
Mhm.
management. Let's turn off those USB drives, right? Let's configure, either Microsoft or Google settings so you can't take things out of bounds, right? I mean, and then you talk about managed browser. You talk about all the tools that highly sophisticated organizations use to make sure that it's very, very difficult. Once you're in the vault, you've got to run through 5 walls to get outside with the valuable data. So those would all be questions I think that may or may not surface in that TD Bank, right? But those aren't trade secrets, but I think the defense should be exactly the same.
Well, I'm just gonna pull up here on the screen because I pretty much every day of my career in the last couple of years have had to confront the fact that the world um, has just barely, as an economy, as a people, as a planet, we've just barely gotten to the competency of basic cyber hygiene, right? but we have not yet really, as a world, really dealt with uh, data security. And
Yeah.
so we're protecting our endpoints, we're protecting our email accounts from someone getting access to them, but we're not doing a very good job of protecting the data inside those accounts. We're protecting our access to various company systems, but we're not great at protecting the data in those systems. And it's leaking out over and over again, and we blame the systems. But there are things you can do to protect the data itself. And frankly, it's some people stuff. And I don't usually share screenshots of our product, but I did want to just as a sort of a
Yeah.
that's a little annoying the way that let's see if I can. There we go. So I have here it looks like most of CIS fits on the screen there. I can make this just a little bit smaller, and we can get it all there, I think. So this is basically the art of data protection, right? It's I'm just going to run down it, right? It's come up with a process to protect your data, inventory it, create access lists. This is stuff that I think admins of those first three, like systems administrators, infrastructure people, MSPs, they're really good at that third thing, making the access control lists. Not so good at the process to create an inventory. And they do an okay job of, I'm going to say, I'm seeing an increasingly good job of um, retaining data to make sure it doesn't get deleted when it shouldn't, although that is something you need to go do because it's not enabled by default. You need to make sure that people can't delete data that shouldn't be deleted, that it's saved someplace. And backups are one way to do that. But the next one, securely disposing of data, and I think people know how to shred hard drives or destroy encryption keys, but one of the really important things is that you dispose of the data at the end of your retention period automatically. If the data don't like and there's certain types of trade secret control that the way to control that data is to make sure that when it's being used, it's there, and when you don't need it anymore, it's going away, right? And that's the way that you would protect it, right? And I think that it's just a really important concept. I don't see people doing that at nearly the level they need to be doing that, making sure that the data is retained and then making sure it's erased. Um, do you see other places on this list that people need to really focus on right now?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting when you look at CIS 3, right, in terms of data protection. You just mentioned it. Historically, cybersecurity was very almost like your outer perimeter, protect the perimeter, right? Like a lot of the
Yeah.
tool, right? So then it became, as 2020 and working remote, it really turned into like this zero access, uh, you know, need to know basis, zero trust, right? At least, and that was really focused on, right, almost protecting these silos and giving need to know access. But it didn't really break into that asset inventory and the data, this idea of data classification and getting very granular in terms of what data is actually in those vessels or in those silos or in whatever kind of container that zero trust is all about. So um, I talk a lot about this at conferences, like this whole idea of like data centric security, and that sounds a little nebulous, right?
Well, the DLP vendors are really good at talking about data centric security, right? And I think that the rest of us need to catch up.
Yeah, and you mentioned data classification scheme, right? So just let's
Yep, that's
let's
another
work,
one.
yeah, working backwards, right? So we talked about proprietary data, we talked about regulated privacy data, we talked about public data, right? So like, how do you put all these things into different buckets? It's really hard. I mean, everyone's exponentially creating more data. Um, there's tools out there that do the easy stuff, right? Like finding social security numbers are 10 numbers, 9 numbers, something like that, right? In a certain form. So those are really easy to find in the haystack. It gets much more difficult to figure out what is proprietary data unless it's like tagged or humanly tagged. I know there are some AI systems that are getting better at doing this. I've certainly looked at a lot of vendors in the last 3 months that are some very, some very impressive things. But, as I said, this granularity of the data and like what's in the haystack and how do we sort the haystack so that they do all the rest of these things right on CIS3 is very difficult, right? So I think
I
that
love
will,
starting in the middle, Tim.
yeah,
I love starting with the data flows because
right,
when you and I think a lot of MSPs understand what a network diagram is supposed to look like. There's not as much understanding of what a data flow diagram is supposed to look like, but I love creating those data flows side by side with the customer because it's maybe the only part of the process that they automatically understand. Okay, the information starts out here, it flows through here, it's accessed by people over here, it's stored here, right? That is something that a customer understands. And if you don't have that conversation with them, you're not actually going to be able to get that brain dump from them that you need because like you said you can scan for social security numbers, but how do you scan for someone's trade secrets really? You need to
yeah.
talk to them.
So that is a good proxy, right? So it's another way to, this data flow always contains PII or PHI or PCI, right? Like all things that are easy to scan. But as you said, proprietary aspects, it's tagging that data flow is great. So I agree. Yeah.
um, I'm
So
breaking my own rules because I hate
stepping
doing
back on that
screenshots. But
too, Matt. So once you do tag data flows or tag data on a granular basis, you can concentrate your efforts, right? Risk management 101, likelihood and
oh
impact.
yeah,
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 so
yeah.
now we're focusing on concentrating our cybersecurity efforts on certain areas where criticality or sensitivity. So yeah,
So that way down at the bottom of the list, not to go back to the list, which I should get rid of the screenshot because I'm an anti screenshot on video guy. But um, three 3.12, right, to segment the data processing and storage based on sensitivity. And it sounds like something that's an annoyance, right? Oh man, everything's in one place and I got to separate it into separate piles. But actually, it makes things so much easier for the service provider and for the customer when they know that the super secret stuff goes in the super secret stuff pile, and you only have to do role based access controls and all the really sophisticated human intense security processes across the board only need to be at their peak in that place where the very sensitive stuff is, right? And if you try to deploy that stuff everywhere, you'll get lost in the weeds and you will never be able to operate the security system at the level it needs to be.
this is exactly the conversations in the courtroom for that TD Bank case coming up, right? As you
What?
said,
Yeah.
right? Confidential PII, like who has access? Why aren't we focusing all of our effort on that, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna go Google that right later, because I'm curious which system they got at, and but the one in the financial institutions I've been exposed to, the document management systems are a little scary to me, particularly the systems that support um, uh, you know what is it the right to know laws around loans. Some of those documentation systems are a little. They can be configured securely, but frequently it's like every underwriter in the organization can access all the data going back forever. I've seen that before.
Right.
I've seen the same thing in insurance agencies, right? And the funny thing is, you go onto those insurance forms and you basically like pour out your soul onto the page, right? And it goes into the system, and it's in there forever. And you might not have even bought the insurance at that place because they came back with the quote, and you were like, nah, forget it. And meanwhile, they've got your data forever, right? And so, I think there are some systems like that, the places where you store those things that need to be the most secure places. And it's a conversation you really have to have with your clients. And I haven't. It's been a few years since I had an insurance a direct insurance engagement where they were my client instead of my peer. But in those conversations, I understand the contention. Like that's the system they're using for sales, and they never want to slow down sales, right?
Right.
But you have to strike that balance.
It's and trust me, like, I don't know, what is our 100,000 employees at a bank like that, right? So those insurance applications, the data flows in 25 different directions, and then you're doing need to know basis. Like, it's no small feat. So I think the thing I saw, working at Cabela, the last company, was it really focused on this, very core to this classification. They call it attack surface management. They use data posture management, right? They're using all these different words that Gartner's picking up on and making quadrant graphs. But the thing that when we scan a lot of these companies is the office manager or HR or somebody, like, when it comes to PII, like, you kind of know who has the data, right? So,
Yes, I
how are
hope
they
they're getting
trained?
trained. Are they
Right.
being trained actually impacts your ability to enforce trade secrets, right? Because if if they made an error and that's why the data leaked out, and the error is because they weren't a cyber person, right? They're an office manager, and you
Right.
didn't train that. If the only thing you trained them to do was don't click on links, which is unfortunately what a lot of our cyber awareness training amounts to in the world. If that's the only thing you trained them in, I don't know that if I was if I was in an expert box and someone said, well, is that reasonable that the person with all the PII was trained to not click on links, but they weren't trained not to like answer like pretexting questions over the phone, right? Um, what would I think about that? And I would probably say no. It seems like maybe that cyber awareness training program was not appropriately designed to protect your trade secrets. I think that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another element, recurring and ongoing training, initial training on onboarding for trade secrets is really important, right? Like, building that culture, building that respect that there are things that are valuable. Um, as you said, like, 5 years from now, looking back in the courtroom, right? let's make sure that those reasonable protections are in place. And most of cyber awareness training, as you said, is phishing simulations and things like that, where
Which is a
it's
piece of
certainly
it.
important. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but
It
it's
is
not
important.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah. How to report like they accidentally clicked on the link, right? Like now what, right? That's also important, right? Like hopefully they don't sweep it under the rug because they realize they made a mistake because the training told them not to do it and they did the thing, right? Like what they should be doing is raising their hand and reporting that and saying, "Oh, I clicked the thing. I know I wasn't supposed to, but that's why I'm letting you know." Right?
yeah. And there's a lot, as you said, there's a lot of training there. There's a lot of deterrence there. Oh yeah, I could raise my hand and say I made a mistake, or like the guys that are logging it and looking at the logs are going to figure out that it was my mistake anyway. So I might want to raise my hand and be helpful and expedite the situation and get incident response underway.
Mhm. Okay, so your practice focus, uh I think you've just been getting more focused over the last year, really drilling down on data security. Where do you see, the demand in your practice really leading here? Are people are your average end client, are they becoming more conscious of their need to drill down here around I might expand beyond trade secrets because it's a porous border, right? The need to
Sure.
protect the data, though, rather than the need to protect the systems. Do you see that knowledge making it to the end customer or small business owner?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm focused on law firms in the tri-state area, and most of these, law firms, most lawyers are pretty savvy in terms of privacy. Maybe not so much on the trade secret and proprietary aspects, unless they're, uh, specifically IP attorneys. They understand it. Um, I think that the really big explosion of needs, as we just talked about, CIS3, is this granularity. A lot of these new tools coming out, Cabello is a data classification tool. Uh, you know, um, Purview is a big one, which is actually a Microsoft E5 tool, but Purview has exploded on Microsoft.
Mhm.
Everyone's using it. Varonis is another one that's been around for a long time. Netrix. So a lot of these data classification tools are helping automate and make it easier to create these haystacks so you can really focus on like protecting them. So there's a lot of integration there. There's a lot of tuning. A lot of my engagements focus on that, right? Like setting it up. Uh, they always joke around in the MSP, if you put a tool in and it's you start it with it tuned a little too tight, it's not going to end well, right, for the MSP. So taking these baby steps, crawl, walk, run, right, in terms of turning the tool on. Let's focus on social security numbers. Then let's focus on a different batch of data. Then let's create some rules. Let's create some rules where the access is, that someone's had access for this too long, or someone's, this person shouldn't have access to this. So these tools are really instrumental in not only initiating data classification, but also running simulations or almost audits on currently where am I from a zero trust perspective or zero trust posture. So if you're using these tools, like it'll just point out your glaring kind of open gaps, and that's important.
So this sounds like something that requires hand holding to get right from someone who's done it before. Tell me what this looks like from an engagement perspective. And I don't know. At some point, the green fielding's done, right? The level of maturity has been reached, and it's sort of a maintenance mode from there. But what does that look like from an engagement of someone coming into your practice? Is it like 0 to 90 days and then 90 plus? What do those phases look like?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the work is up front, right, in the first month, and then the tuning over time, revisiting those, iterating in terms of like, are you getting false positives? Are you getting, are you creating too much of a friction, right, for the firm? That's important. But really just tuning that, creating new rules. You're creating metrics, right? As you said, risk management 101, right? Like, how do you create some kind of metrics that shows over time I'm making some kind of progress? So that is a revisitation, usually on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly our engagements on that. There's other tools as well that are really of interest to lawyers. So document sharing and communication is really important. How do you know that there's some bad ways to do it, right? So Matt Fish is my client. I sent him a PDF. We're under NDA. I don't know where he takes that PDF and forwards it to, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you've lost that chain of title of understanding of this sensitive document. Maybe it's Matt's application for a patent. Maybe it's evidence. Maybe it's
I like putting the instructions right at the bottom of the document.
Right. So there's a lot of these new document. There's platforms that can do this, which are you log in, it's encrypted, right? You're using FIDO2 encryption to authenticate. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. One of the neat ones I've seen is called stenography, where each document is actually jumbled a little. The text is moved around. So
Mm-hmm.
and they can be water. You can either have the watermark or not have the watermark. So if I send it to you, that's a unique copy, and you better not mess with it and violate your NDA.
Yeah, so you can have these digital watermarks that are either someone knows about or doesn't know about, right?
Right. So you can use it as I prefer that they use the watermark just because it's a visual deterrent to break
Yeah.
NDA or break
No,
confidentiality.
I agree.
And they've gone to almost like web-based platforms for that. Data rooms are traditional, right? Those are very popular in legal and financial services. But even then, if the data room allows you to download a PDF, you've broken the chain of custody. It can keep going, right? Outside of that sphere of zero trust or need to know access. So that's another area that's of interest. And then just general hygiene, right? Like just doing a gap assessment against CIS, like you can get a pretty good idea, which Matt does quite a lot of CIS gap assessments. So.
Some days that's all I do. But I'm increasingly I'm doing a little bit of so there's this really interest. So NIST CSF2 came out last year,
Right.
And I was really excited at the time because NIST CSF 1 had been so popular, but it was bad. I'm a security guy. I nitpick on stupid little things, but I didn't like NIST CSF 1.1, and I was excited when 2 came out. But they did a really good job of classifying the security things an organization needs to do in ways that are easy to understand, and with the NIST 6 functions, right?
Right.
So I'm increasingly using those alongside CIS to explain security to people.
Yeah, I mean the govern edition is massive, even at law firms. Like, they, who's in charge, who's the individual that is ultimately responsible. When someone's ultimately responsible, they're empowered, they're a champion. So, MSPs should always, start with that, right? I think Fort Mesa, that is a part of the platform that's probably not used quite enough, right? But just empowering and naming an individual responsible for cybersecurity is huge, and that I'm glad. And NIST CSF 2.0 has spelled that out. I wish they would have spelled it out a little more. Just like, make sure someone's in charge. And obviously, governance goes way beyond that. But I think
Uh,
finding a champion, finding someone who's ultimately responsible at a small business like a law firm or mid-sized firm.
it's all too often, right?
Yeah,
That what happens is you ask someone in a small to medium business who's in charge of security, and they point their fingers at the IT guy, and then you go to the IT guy and you say who's in charge of security, and he's pointing the other direction, right? And that's that's super common, right? And it's very important for an
yeah,
organization to make sure someone has raised their hand and said, okay, it's me and I know it's me, right? That is
yeah.
very important.
And it's me, but I'm taking on this role, but I need to be empowered and I need to have a say. And I think it's a
Yeah.
great conversation to start with. So
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about. We've gone deep here, and we can spend another minute on takeaways. And then I want to talk about next week, and we're out of here. So, if you were to give a quick pitch, right? What are the, I don't know if you want to do top three or the number one most important thing to protect trade secrets? Shoot, what is it?
yeah, top three. That's tough, right? I think knowing where your important data is, employee acknowledgement that they have a responsibility is huge. So that's in a non-tool technical contractual thing that's important. Um, that's probably the biggest thing, I think, number one. And then number two is actually tracking this stuff and making reasonable precautions. So left the boom, you're doing things. You have deterrence. I think deterrence are huge. Watermarks are huge. Once you get to write a boom, you're in trouble. You're gonna have a really hard time tracking this stuff down. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
most of the industry and a lot of the jobs that I've seen out there are focused on incident response. This falls into the threat intelligence umbrella. This falls into the threat hunt, but it's very difficult to hunt insiders. So
Yeah, and for me, I would say deciding what's secret is it's a group conversation and it's something that should happen,
yeah,
um, and that is super important. And then again, the group conversation. Okay, what are we going to do about it? How are we gonna protect those things? Where are those things, and how are we going to protect them? I think the mechanical parts, the security tools that are increasingly sophisticated these days. Yeah, job for the geeks, right? But that first part has to happen.
yeah.
Um, all right, so next week, I've got Mike McCake from Iceberg Cyber, and he's coming in to talk about how to drive sales. Mike's Mike's shop is all about using vulnerability management or vulnerability scanning to prospect, and he's going to come in and talk to us about the talk about talking about security with your clients to sell. So next Friday, 2:30 Eastern time. Until then, thanks everyone. Like, subscribe, tell everyone about whatever you heard today if you thought it was useful, and see you later.